Hi, everybody joining in. A wonderful afternoon to you, wherever you're watching us from, or evening or morning, wherever you're watching us from. And welcome to today's session on COVID-19 vaccines. We are here to break all the myths and the conspiracies that you've heard around. And it's interesting, the kind of things that I hear day in and day out concerning the vaccines. So I'm here to also be thoughts. Um, in a few minutes, we'll just start. And ideally, today it's an informative session. And a very interactive one. So, any question at all you have concerning the COVID-19 vaccine that you're not so sure of, or you heard somebody say, we are here with experts to answer all your questions that you have. So, in a bit of a minute, just in about 2 minutes, we'll just start. And so we are ready for you and your questions. My name is Lois Efwa Ochiwa Damte. I am the Secretary for the Vacation Initiatives in Science Africa. And what Vacation Initiative in Science Africa does is that we together with a lot of other NGOs come together to engage the community on various science practicals that are around. Over the years, we have been engaged with a lot of engagement exercises concerning infectious diseases and raising a lot of public awareness or public outreaches as far as infectious diseases is concerned. We did this project together with Cambridge, Africa, and COVID-19 just fell in line or fell in place with all the infectious disease public outreaches that we have done. And we felt like this is a great venture, a great art venue to actually engage you all, which is the general public, on what COVID-19 has come to stay. Obviously not for so long, we hope, and the vaccine and whatever you've heard about it, and try and break all the myths with that. So without much I say, we have an expert who has been on almost all the public media spaces in Ghana and across, engaged in trying to answer a lot of questions when COVID-19 came about. He's also worked extensively with WAGBIB. WAGBIB is the West African WABID is the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens in the University of Ghana. In addition to his academic post as well, he was recently selected to be an affiliate member of the African Academy of Sciences. He's very passionate about increasing the research capacity of African scientists, as well as creating a network of researchers on the continent. His commitment to this is evident by being one of the executive members of the African Science Initiatives. He was a faculty member of IDA 2019 Symposium, and we are fortunate, we are honored as Vacation Initiatives in Science Africa to engage them in all our Q&A. And this will focus highly, as I said, on COVID-19 vaccine, the questions that are coming from the general public. So without much ado, I'll just say a warm welcome to Dr. Yaw Bediako. But Dr. Yaw Bediako, you're welcome to today's session.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I'll just start with one of the favorite questions that has been all around. And obviously, like I said, we are trying as much as possible to take questions from you. So if you have any questions, you can put in the chat box section and we'll be sure to answer them. So one of the favorite questions that I've also had to answer, I'm a scientist, but I've still had my doubts that the vaccine came within a shortest possible time. And so the efficacy of the vaccine could be low because it was created in a haste. Please, could you help us explain that and whether it has any low efficiency whatsoever?
All right, so thank you for the question and thank you for having me on. Yeah, this is a common question that comes up a lot, and it's true that the vaccine has been developed relatively quickly. I mean, we have achieved a vaccine within 12 months, which in many ways has never happened before. But the reason we've been able to do this is not because any corners have been cut or anything has been rushed. It is that there were virtually unlimited resources available. Most vaccines take on the order of sometimes even 10 years to develop. Typically, it's a combination of challenges with the biology, but also a lot of the times there's challenges with finance. Vaccines cost a lot of money to, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. And oftentimes companies or researchers do not have the resources available to really push or to push their development basically as fast as possible. With COVID-19, given that it was such a global emergency, wealthy countries around the world have paid for the vaccine development. They have partnered with pharmaceutical companies, and also pharmaceutical companies are very motivated to invest in this because they know that there's a ready market for their product. If you can generate a vaccine, people will buy it. So you are willing to put whatever it costs towards the development. So what has happened is that events that or processes that would usually be done in series have been done in parallel. So if you needed to do a phase 3 trial, you needed to do it in 3 different locations instead of doing one after the other, which is what you normally do because you have limited resources. They did them all at the same time. So all the vaccines that have been approved so far have gone through extensive preclinical phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 testing that involves ultimately, at times more than 20,000 people being exposed to a particular vaccine. And then before it is approved. So all the regulatory steps have been done as no cutting of corners. It's just that because there was so much money available, certain processes in the development of the vaccine were able to be done in parallel. And even the clinical trials did not have to wait for one another. They could all be done at the same time. And once the data is available, decisions can be made.
That's very interesting. Yeah. True. Yeah. I mean, I'm a scientist as well, so I know the money that has to go into it. And obviously, because it's a global pandemic, now things will be quickened as much as possible so we get things moving. So yeah, that's a myth that has been broken, and I think I'll be sure to send it across. So another question is that is it true that COVID-19 vaccine is given as part of the vaccination?
COVID-19 vaccine is given as part. Sorry, I don't
I
understand the
mean,
question.
like the COVID-19 is giving, well, like when you vaccinate someone, you get the COVID-19
Oh,
before you the vaccine works.
no, it's not true. The vaccine does not give you the disease. I mean, that would defeat the purpose. The whole point of vaccination is to train your immune system to recognize the virus, so that if you came into contact with it subsequently, you would be able to mount a response and be protected. The vaccine, if we think about the AstraZeneca vaccine, for instance, that we currently have in Ghana, it is actually an adenovirus, a recombinant adenovirus. So an adenovirus causes colds, relatively harmless virus. In this case, actually, it's from a chimpanzee. So it's a chimp adenovirus that has been genetically modified to express the spike protein from SARS-CoV-2. So it's not the whole SARS-CoV-2 virus. It is a different virus that is expressing a protein from the virus that causes the disease. And the point is that when you are injected with that, your immune system will see this protein. It will make antibodies and T cells against that protein. And so if you did come into contact with SARS-CoV-2 for real, your body would recognize it and be able to make a very strong response. So you don't get COVID-19 from the vaccine. You may have a little bit of fever. I have received the vaccine. I had fever for maybe 24 hours. I had some body aches, I mean, it didn't feel very good. But it lasted a day. I mean, it was not life-threatening. It was just my immune system responding to the virus, to the vaccine.
To the vaccine.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there's also another, I mean, myth that, I think my mom shared it with me saying that, so does the the vaccine cure the COVID-19 disease? Because then what's the point? So I think that was a question. Yeah.
So vaccines are not cures. Vaccines are not treatments. Vaccines are prevention. So you take a vaccine to protect you from subsequent exposure. Now, with a disease like COVID-19, just because you've had it once, so if you have recovered from COVID-19, it doesn't mean you can't get it again. In fact, there are people in Ghana who've had COVID as many as 3 or 4 times, and there are some people who've actually had it once, recovered, had it a second time, and died. So it appears as though natural exposure, so getting COVID-19, does not induce enough of a protective response for you to be able to be protected. So the vaccine is meant to protect you. So it doesn't, if you're already sick with COVID-19, getting the vaccine is not going to cure that episode. But if you were to recover, then hopefully the vaccine would have given you enough antibodies that if you were exposed to the virus again, you would be protected.
Okay. All right. Question well answered. Thank you, Doc. Another question was that a lot of research hasn't gone into checking the women who are pregnant. They are not advised to take it. So, does the vaccine cause any miscarriage or any infertility in women or both gender? Yeah.
No, it does not. There's no evidence that the vaccine causes any issues with fertility. That is, that is just a myth that is unsubstantiated. There's nothing in literature, there's nothing in the clinical trials that will give you any indication that vaccines will affect a woman's ability to have a baby. The reason pregnant women are not being given the vaccine at the moment is more concern for the developing baby. And that is not specific, it's not peculiar to this vaccine. Most medications, even if you buy vitamins from the pharmacy, if you look at the bottle, it'll probably say if you are pregnant, please ask your doctor before taking this product. Pregnancy is just such, you know, a a finely tuned process that oftentimes medically doctors are very careful with pregnant women. There's also very few clinical trials that are done in pregnant women for that reason. So there's not a lot of data showing, so there's a little, I wouldn't say it's concern, but there's just caution in dealing with women who are pregnant. But it has nothing to do with their fertility. So if you are thinking of getting pregnant, get the vaccine. Because actually, when you're pregnant, you're more at risk of getting COVID-19, severe disease from
Mhm.
COVID-19. So pregnant women are actually more at risk of succumbing to COVID-19 than other people. So if you're thinking of getting pregnant, I would wait till you get the vaccine before actually getting pregnant. Um, but the vaccine itself does nothing to your fertility. With men, same thing. Actually, COVID-19 disease has appears in some men have left them issues of erectile dysfunction for a while. So actually, if you're a man, getting the vaccine may actually be a way to protect your fertility as opposed to harming it.
Okay, thank you. Um, just to the general public, you can ask your questions, and we want to make it a bit orderly. So if you have a question, a little bit of housekeeping, you can just raise your hand, and I'll be sure to call you to ask your question if you're comfortable to just speak. And just like I was saying, no question is in quotes stupid because you just want to have your questions answered. So I'll ensure you if you want to also raise your hand to ask any question. This is what we're here for. We're just keeping the conversation going. If there's any question I've not asked and you really want to ask it and is on your mind, please do raise your hand and I'll be sure to call you to answer the question. So Alexandra in the comment section is asking that what do you think should be done in Ghana with respect to the concerns raised with the AstraZeneca vaccine? Mm,
I mean, you mean the concerns regarding? I'm guessing she's referring to the concerns regarding blood clots.
yeah.
Well, in my opinion, those were overreactions, and they were not really concerns that were something that needed to be paid attention to, as is evidenced by the fact that pretty much all those countries who raised concerns, have now gone back to using the AstraZeneca vaccine. It was a complete overreaction. The reason is blood clots happen quite frequently in people. I think there's 1 in 1,000 people who get a blood clot. The rates of blood clots among people who received the vaccine compared to people who had not received the vaccine, there were many, many more blood clots happening in people who had not received the vaccine. So there was no way to link, there was no data, there was no solid link between the vaccine and blood clots. So it was just an overreaction. And I think also when we look at it closely, in clinical trials, blood clots were reported in people who received the vaccine, all types of vaccines. So Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca. And yet, for some reason, European countries decided to only pause the use of AstraZeneca vaccine, which happens to be the vaccine developed in the United Kingdom. So, we mustn't forget that there's always politics at play. In
Mm,
my opinion, those decisions were more driven by politics than any kind of biology. The science is clear that there's no causal association between receiving any of these vaccines, for that matter, and blood clots. Unfortunately, blood clots happen. These people were likely probably going to get blood clots anyway. As I've said before, it's equivalent to getting a vaccine and being hit by a car and blaming the vaccine for being hit by the car.
mm. Absolutely, Doc. It makes a whole lot of sense now. Um, Someone was asking that, I mean, in terms of travel and all that, if you take the vaccine, how long are you protected after receiving the vaccine?
We don't really know. These vaccines are new. We've only been rolling them out for a few months. Even from the clinical trials are not even probably a year old. So we don't yet know exactly how long protection lasts. Based on the data we do have and some modeling, it's thought to be anywhere between 6 or 7 months and maybe a year. So it's not indefinite. It's not lifelong. It's not like some other vaccines like measles and so that we have that you get it once and you're protected for life. In this case, probably maybe a year is what you can best, estimate would be the protection, which is why we have to vaccinate quickly and broadly. If we don't get a handle, if we don't get control of the pandemic within a year of vaccinating the first people we vaccinated. So basically, we started vaccinating this past month. So if we don't have a handle on COVID-19 by March of next year, then it's likely we'd have to just vaccinate everybody all over again, which would be,
Really?
a serious problem. So we have to vaccinate. We have to hit herd immunity. We have to hit the 20 million Ghanaians vaccinated by the end of this year.
Hmm. That shook me a bit. I think you've been saying a lot of like clinical trials. I mean, if you could just break that down, what does it mean by like doing clinical trials in phases, like just like you said?
So when you're developing a vaccine, you start off by doing preclinical work, which is in the lab, usually in cells or in animals, and that's where you start off developing the vaccine. Once you have something that you think works, you then do a phase one clinical trial where you're testing it in people. But these are healthy people, they are volunteers, they're not that many, maybe about 40 people. And they volunteer to take the vaccine. And there you're looking to see whether or not you will whether or not it's safe. Will they have any negative adverse reaction, or do they have any adverse reactions to the vaccine? After that phase one trial, then you enter phase two, where now you're looking at a larger number of people. So now you're vaccinating hundreds of people, and once again assessing whether it's safe, and then beginning to see if it makes any kind of immune response. Then after you passes that, you go into a phase three trial. Now you're vaccinating thousands of people, and here you are looking to see if the vaccine works. So these are people who are exposed to whatever disease it is you are vaccinating against. And then for half the people, you give them the vaccine. For the other half, you give them a placebo. You give them another vaccine that is unrelated. And so neither groups of people will know. Usually these are blind trials. So nobody knows what they have. And then you basically measure to see if one group has more of the disease than the other. And you hope that the group that you gave the vaccine to will have less, indicating that your vaccine is working. So those are clinical trials. They are very, very important in testing, first to see if a vaccine is safe, and secondly to see if a vaccine is working.
Mm, absolutely. So Chris, Abana is asking that is it true that if you've had COVID-19 before, before you should wait for 3 months before taking the vaccine? If it's true, what's the science behind it?
I have not seen any evidence that that's true. No, I don't believe that is true. Typically, if you are currently sick with anything, you don't usually get a vaccination. You wait till you're healthy. So if you have fever, you're not, you have a headache, whatever. If you have if you're symptomatic for anything, whether it's a cold or malaria or COVID-19, you usually wait before you go and try and get a vaccine. That is probably more for the safety of the health worker who is giving you the shot than anything else, but that is typical practice. But no, there's no evidence that if you've had COVID-19, you have to wait a specific amount of time before you can get the vaccine. Everybody should go and get the vaccine as soon as they can.
Okay. Then it's asking that why do most vaccines come through injection? Can the vaccines administered through other forms? My kid's brother is afraid of injection and it's a no-go area for him.
I mean, people are working on this. We already have some vaccines that are given orally. So the oral polio vaccine is an example. And I believe in certain parts of the world, they are working on needle-less injection mechanisms where you can just a puff of air and force it in. A needle is the most direct way to get something in quickly into your body. And that is why we use needles. Now, of course, yes, it's a little bit of pain. People are a little bit scared. I think technology is trying to work on that so that there may be less. So there are less painful ways to administer vaccines, but of course they come at a cost, and um, they may not always be available for every type of vaccine. So I think for now, given that it's an emergency and we have to move quickly, unfortunately, your brother is going to just have to, just get the vaccine. But I can speak from experience to say that it's not terribly painful. I mean, if you don't even look, sometimes you don't even know it's going in.
Yeah.
So I think it is obviously a phobia for some people. I get that, but at this stage, we should be more scared of COVID-19 than a needle.
That the injection, the pinch. Someone is asking that. This question got me smiling even before it came. It said, what's the relationship between COVID-19 and 5G? Is there any microchip masked within the vaccine?
I have no idea. This is beyond my area of expertise. 5G, as far as I know, is it's a way of communicating from cell towers to phones. It's a way of transmitting information.
Yeah.
Vaccines are biological. All right, vaccines are biological agents that you are injecting into your body. I don't know where this 5G conspiracy came from. As far as I'm concerned, it's a little bit ridiculous, but anyway. Yeah, so I can't speak to it because there's no science, there's no, in all my training, that has not prepared me to answer the question about 5G and vaccines. So as far as I know, there's no link.
Thank you, Doug. Seth is asking that did we, that means Ghanaians in quotes, need the vaccine? The infection resulted in about 80% asymptomatic cases, whereas the vaccination produced close to 80% severe adverse effects.
Um, I would say this is not entirely accurate. Severe adverse effects. I mean, adverse effects, yes. Everybody, a large number of people are reporting a little bit of fever. But these are not severe adverse effects. These are, it's most likely when we give vaccines to babies, they probably get all of these, but they can't tell us. And, babies in many ways are stronger than most of us. So they keep on moving. Um, Getting fever after a vaccine is what your immune system is supposed to do. I mean, you've injected something into your body, you want to induce an immune response. Fever, pain, those are parts of the immune response. That's your immune system going into action. When we get a cold and we have our lymph nodes paining under our throat, that is your immune system going into action. So I would argue that 80% severe adverse effects, it's a bit of an overstatement. They were not severe adverse effects. They were just adverse. And in my opinion, I don't even think they are adverse effects. The way the FDA works, anything that is slightly uncomfortable is going to be listed as an adverse effect. And that is because they are trying to be very, very careful. But let's be honest. If you are down for a day, most of us get colds. Would we call a cold an adverse effect, right? You get a cold, maybe you can't go to work, you drink, tea or ginger, and maybe you stick your head in a bucket with steam and you feel a little bit bad. And then the next day or the 2 days later, you go back to work. Would we call that an adverse event? We'd say I was a little bit ill. But when the same thing happens from a vaccine, all of a sudden we're labeling it adverse events. I think we have to, be careful with the terminology. And also it's about risk benefit. Yes, 80% of Ghanaians have had asymptomatic disease. But since January to now, we've had about 400 people who have died. So I would assume that those people's families will not quite view, when you play the numbers, it's always nice when you are in the 80%, but the 20% is another point. And we've certainly seen an escalation. March to December last year, we had 335 or something deaths. January, now we are at over 700 deaths just since, at the end of March. So that shows well over 400 deaths happening in a 3-month period. So something has changed. COVID is much more severe now in Ghana than it used to be. I don't quite know what it is, whether it's the new strains, the new variants, or whatever. But clearly COVID is not something to play with. So yes, a lot of people have recovered, but there are a lot of people who have recovered who are also dealing with the effects of long COVID. So COVID can leave you with very debilitating effects. I've spoken to a few people who their COVID itself was not that bad. They didn't need a ventilator. And yet now they can't walk up more than 3 flights or two. They walk up a flight of steps and they are panting for 20 minutes. Or they have vertigo, they are dizzy and so on. So COVID is not a joke. Thankfully for some people who've had it, they've recovered and they seem fine. But I think it's important to remember that
Sorry.
The risk it poses is significantly grave. That a little bit of fever, a little bit of pain in your arm is not enough to justify not getting the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very clear. Per your NS is asking that per your submission, it's okay to assume that the vaccines are largely meant for expanded clinical trials. Since obviously trials in animal models were probably little or as it were skipped due to the emergency the pandemic posed.
That is not true. As I said at the beginning, these are not experimental vaccines. These vaccines have gone through all phases. Nothing was skipped. Um, so these are not for clinical trial. We continue to collect data. It's just prudent. It's good practice that when you have something, a situation like this, you continue to collect data as you are as you are vaccinating. So we are continuing to collect data, but all the vaccines that have been approved in Ghana right now, Sputnik 5, AstraZeneca, even not Johnson and Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, all of these have completed phase 3 trials. And so they are not experimental. It's not it's not about clinical trials. They finished the clinical trials. They've proven to be safe and they've proven to be effective. But we obviously need to continue to collect data locally to see how how effective they are. Safety is never really a concern, in my opinion. Safety, if you test it in London and it's safe in Ghana. But efficacy, how well the vaccine works, that can differ from location to location based on genetics and based on exposure to other pathogens. And so we need to get an idea of what is the level of protection that we actually get locally. But right now is the best we have. So we should and there's really no danger in using it. We just have to keep using it and hope that it does that.
Yeah. Someone is asking that so far has any country reached herd immunity? How far or close um is our dear Ghana to herd immunity?
Oh, we are very, very far away from herd immunity. Herd immunity, we need to be around 60 to 70% vaccinated. Ghana has not even vaccinated 1% of our population. So we've so far done probably 400 to maybe 500,000 doses. We have a population of 30 million people. So anybody can do the math. So what is 60 or 70% of 30 million people? Is about 20 something million.
Yeah.
And we've done 400,000. So herd immunity, we'll only hit herd immunity if we achieve the levels of vaccination that His Excellency the President has described, which is, I think, by the end of the year, hoping to hit 20 million people. So we have our work cut out for us. We have to get more vaccines in order to allow us to do this.
Hmm. How long will it take to get the second vaccine? Scientifically, what's the interval between the first and the second shot?
So for AstraZeneca, they differ from vaccine to vaccine. For AstraZeneca, initially it was 4 weeks, but the data from a number of places demonstrated that you actually got better protection if you waited longer. So in Ghana right now, it's an 8-week gap between first and second doses. You can go all the way up to 12 weeks and still have very, very good protection. In fact, the longer, the better it would seem, at least up to 12 weeks. So for AstraZeneca, we're looking at 8 to 12 weeks in between. So that's 2 to 3 months in between the first and second dose. So those who got vaccinated in March are looking at dates, I think in May, for their second shots.
Okay. Someone is asking that is it true that the mRNA vaccine has the tendency to cause mutation to the human DNA?
No, it's not true. It's practically it's impossible. RNA usually does not, very rarely enters the nucleus. It hardly ever enters the nucleus, which is where your DNA is. So that's the first thing. And then RNA does not integrate into DNA. So this RNA basically is packaged, it enters a cell, it will be made into proteins. The proteins will be expressed, it will trigger antibody and T cell responses, and that RNA is then gone. The RNA, there's no residual RNA that's left. And biologically, there's no way that RNA integrates. All of that is just fake science that people have been talking about. Anybody who has taken maybe level 100, level 200 biology, cell biology knows that RNA and DNA do not integrate with one another.
It's quite surprising how everybody became a scientist over time. Like everybody has proof of things that are happening. Sometimes I hear these things, I'm like, this is beyond my comprehension. Like, guys. Okay, someone is asking that how many times are we going to be vaccinated considering the detection COVID-19 variant every now and then?
That's a good question. We hope that we can only, if we do the vaccination right, we should be able to get on top of this with one shot. And we shouldn't need to have to keep vaccinating. However, if the virus continues to transmit and we don't eliminate it or eradicate it through vaccination, then it may become like seasonal flu. In Europe and in North America, every year they take flu shots because flu viruses are circulating, and every year it's a different variant, and so the WHO will release a vaccine.
Yeah.
I hope we don't get to that. I hope that doesn't happen with SARS-CoV-2, but it may. We may get in a situation where if we are not able to eliminate it, then it's always circulating, and every so often we have to get a booster shot with to take care of a different variant. But for now, the reason America is vaccinating 3 million people a day is because they are trying to get on top of it, get rid of the virus before it has time to continue to mutate. And that way we wouldn't, to be completely eliminated, we wouldn't have to do this frequent boosting.
But that's a top-up question to that. I mean, what causes the mutation? Like, why is this particular like virus causing so many different forms of, mutation?
Oh no, viruses mutate all the time. This virus actually mutates less than others. HIV mutates even much, much faster. Flu mutates all the time.
Mm.
So viruses mutate. That is how they are. That is how they are. They have, they lack what's called proofreading ability. So when organisms divide, that is when they potentially mutate. A mutation is basically a change in the DNA. For certain organisms, they are error prone. So when they copy their DNA, they make lots of mistakes. And when that happens, those are mutations. Now, the reason they do that is because they are trying to avoid the immune response. When a virus is in your body and it's growing, it's coming under attack from your immune system. And so the only viruses that can survive will be the ones that have picked up a mutation that makes them invisible or makes them less likely to be recognized by your immune system. So viruses that are successful are viruses that are able to mutate. So mutation is normal. In fact, probably we'll see the mutation rate increase as we continue to vaccinate because we'll be applying more immune pressure to the virus. So it's not unusual. Viruses mutate. It's just that means that we are in a race.
Yeah.
And so we have to behave as such. We have to take it seriously enough. And so that's what I'm saying. These vaccines were developed last year. They were based on the original, strain of the virus. That strain is gone. That strain doesn't exist in Ghana anymore. Now there are mutations. Thankfully, majority of the variants still look sufficiently like the original one that the vaccine is still working. But there will come a time when it won't. And at that point, the vaccine will be useless. So if we don't vaccinate quickly enough and get rid of the virus, then we'll be back, like I said, we'll be back at square one because now we'll have a variant on our hands for which the vaccine doesn't work. And now we'll be looking to try to develop a new vaccine for which we don't have time.
You don't have time for my days. Okay, someone is asking, Dr. Butcher is asking that, is there any relationship between COVID-19 infection and diabetes?
So there's been some talk about that. I was on a webinar yesterday where some people raised that. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily an expert in that, but one of the explanations I've heard is that COVID-19 may reveal that people who are already diabetic, they may get the diabetes sort of diagnosis as a result of the COVID disease. So they get sick with COVID, they go into the hospital, and then they get diagnosed also with diabetes, not necessarily caused by the virus, but just because when it was undiagnosed, they didn't know their diabetic status. They went in because they were sick of COVID. A number of tests were done. They determined to be diabetic. Now the COVID has resolved, but of course diabetes is still there. So that is the explanation I've heard. I wouldn't say that it's something I have myself looked into very exhaustively, but that is one thing that I've heard, that it's not necessarily that COVID attacks your pancreas, but in people, a lot of people are diabetic without realizing it. There's a lot of undiagnosed underlying conditions in our population. And so sometimes getting sick with one thing gives doctors an opportunity to uncover a lot of problems that you also have. May not be linked to they may not be linked to each other.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. NS is asking that are all the vaccine available work by introducing agents that codes for the viral mRNA?
No. So some of the vaccines, so Pfizer and Moderna are your mRNA vaccines. AstraZeneca vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine. AstraZeneca vaccine, as I said previously, is a recombinant viral vector vaccine. So it's basically a virus, a harmless virus that has been genetically modified to express a protein from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So in this case, it's not viral RNA, unlike the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. So they're all trying to achieve the same thing, but it's slightly different technology.
Pickup question. Someone is asking that what is the herd immunity at all?
So herd immunity is the idea that you don't when you vaccinate, the point of vaccination is to increase the number of resistant people in your population. A virus transmits from an infected person to a susceptible person. It cannot enter an immune or a resistant person. Now, in a population, it's practically impossible to vaccinate everybody. There are children, there are babies being born every day. There are people with certain conditions that preclude vaccination. But if you can vaccinate enough people in your population, you will have enough protected people that the virus has nowhere to go. So think of it as if you think of an image with lots of figures like people. And if the red ones are infected, the blue ones are protected, and the white ones are susceptible, so could be infected. If you have lots of white, so if you have lots of susceptible, the virus has lots of places to go and will spread out of control. If you have lots of blue people in between the red, the virus cannot enter them, and so transmission is blocked. So herd immunity is the idea that if you can have enough resistant, enough protected individuals, they will protect the few people who are not infected or who are not protected. So if you have enough people, think of it as a ring, like a sort of a barrier to everybody. If I am for some reason not immunized and so susceptible, but I am surrounded by people who have all been immunized, the virus is on the outside in somebody who is infected. The virus cannot enter my circle because all the people around me are protected. So that you have to vaccinate a lot to prevent. For viruses that do not transmit very well, you have to vaccinate fewer people to hit herd immunity. So the herd immunity threshold varies. For this virus, it's very transmissible. So herd immunity is 70 to 75%. So we have to vaccinate a lot of people to have that level of protection.
Yeah. Dr. Boche is asking that does your blood type affect your COVID-19 risk?
So that is a good question. Early on, there was some talk about blood group O and COVID risk. I must admit, I haven't looked at it exhaustively. I think it's not that you are completely protected. People with blood type O have had COVID, and I'm sure people with blood type O have had COVID and died. So it's not like you are immune to the virus. But if you looked at a large number of people and you measured how many severe COVID cases you had, it may be that people with blood type O may have a slightly lower risk. But I've not looked at it exhaustively. But I believe there is some literature suggesting that it does confer a little bit of resistance. But I wouldn't want to be quoted on that since I haven't looked at it very well.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're just joining us, we are just taking questions from the public. I mean, that's what the session is all about. Any myths, any conspiracy that you've heard, anything that's is preventing you from having to take the COVID-19 vaccine. We are here to, trash all that out so that you feel safe and we can help change the narrative and reach herd immunity as much as possible. So someone is saying that if, let's say, you took AstraZeneca vaccine as your first shot, would it be okay if you are giving, say, Sputnik as your second shot?
So that's a very good question. It's actually potentially a reality in Ghana. For now, the answer is no. You should, if you took AstraZeneca for first shot, you should take AstraZeneca for the second. But I do know that there is a trial ongoing, or there is some discussion going on about trying to mix and match, because vaccine doses are limiting. There's a huge global demand. Everybody is practically fighting for a few doses. There is talk between AstraZeneca and the Gamaleya Institute in Russia, who developed the Sputnik 5, about, since those two vaccines are based on similar technology. They are very, very similar. They're both viral vector, recombinant viral vector vaccines. That potentially you could use one and the other. But that trial is currently ongoing. We don't have, or at least they're discussing it. We don't have data yet to show that it works. You'd have to test it before you can know that it would be effective. So for now, based on the data that's available, if your card says AstraZeneca, then make sure that when you get a second shot, they are giving you AstraZeneca. Till new data suggests that you can mix and match at least the Sputnik and the AstraZeneca.
Okay. Someone's asking that how unique is the COVID vaccine from other vaccine? Because I know before taking any vaccine, the individual is tested before taking it. But in our case, everyone is receiving it as a random.
That is actually not true. No one is tested before vaccines. We don't, when babies are, if you go to any clinic, any public health clinic in Accra or wherever, go and check who is being vaccinated. They just weigh the children and vaccinate them. There's no testing, and it's not necessary, right? With COVID, you don't have to be COVID. Like I said, you don't have to check your COVID status before you vaccinate you. It has no bearing. It's not going to affect it one way or the other. So really, it's not for vaccination campaigns. When they do these polio vaccination campaigns, they don't test anyway. They come to your house and they give your kid polio drops.
Yeah.
It's a vaccine.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of these misconceptions that somehow vaccination is this mysterious and highly, difficult thing. Vaccination has been around since 1796.
Yeah.
Ghana has had an extended program of immunization since 1978, before I was even born.
Yeah.
Everybody listening to this talk has received lots of vaccines in their life. They probably just don't remember it because they got most of them as children.
Yeah.
And most of us would be dead if it wasn't for the fact that we had vaccines. So vaccination is not something mysterious. It's not something new. And vaccination is probably the reason we are talking to each other today.
Yeah. How long does the coronavirus vaccine last?
I think we answered this already. We're not sure.
I
Anywhere
don't know.
from 6 months to 12 months.
Okay.
So I don't think, as I said, the data is still out there.
Yeah.
We are still following up people who have been vaccinated. So we don't really know. Modeling suggests that it will not be lifelong. It will probably not be that much more than 12 months at the best.
Ernest is asking that is it possible that virus might infect livestock and subsequently undergo genetic reassortment to create new variants?
Yes, it is likely. In fact, probably that is how we got COVID-19 in the first place. It's thought to have come from bats and gone through a pangolin. And typically that's how, the assortment it happens, where you have mixing between maybe a human virus and an animal virus, and somehow they pick up the right traits and now they are transmissible. I saw I saw something this morning that actually they are screening pets. I mean, it's amazing. In Ghana, we can barely test enough. We barely have enough testing capacity for people. In certain countries, they are now testing their pets.
Yeah.
But yes, they found SARS-CoV-2 can infect certain animals. So those could be reservoirs. And that is concerning because if you vaccinate all the people, but it's living inside animals, then potentially you could have a problem. Last year, there was a huge, I think, what animal? I've forgotten. There were these furry animals in, I think, in Belgium or wherever, who were killed because en masse because they were found to be harboring SARS-CoV-2, and there was concern that you'd have new variants. Or what did they use them? Mink. Yes, mink. If you Google it, you find that I think hundreds of thousands of mink, which are these little rodent type animals, which were being reared. They were in farms, were killed because they found to have SARS-CoV-2, and they were worried that it would spread into, a new variant would emerge that would potentially cause more human disease. So yes, it is a concern in animals, and I believe that in some countries they're actually now testing people's pets.
Someone is asking that could COVID-19 be transmitted through feces?
Transmitted we're not sure. You can certainly find evidence of the virus in feces. So there are certain countries actually that are testing their wastewater to get an idea of how much COVID-19 is around. So if you sample sewage and you do PCR on it, you can find evidence of the virus, and that can give you an idea of whether you have an outbreak or not. So some countries are actually using it for surveillance. It's not clear though if you have live virus in feces. So I'm not sure. Unlike polio is transmitted through feces. So polio spreads rapidly through in places that have poor sanitation. It's not entirely clear. SARS-CoV-2, even though it can affect many parts of your body, it is a respiratory virus. It enters through your nose. So unless you are inhaling feces, I'm not sure if that, I'm not sure if it can be transmitted. And also it's unclear whether, even though you can identify, you can do PCR and find evidence of SARS-CoV-2 in feces. I'm not clear. I'd have to look to see if it's been demonstrated to be viable virus. But once again, the point of entry is typically through the respiratory tract.
Yeah. Someone is asking that can a positive individual still take the vaccine?
Yes.
Okay, I think there's another question. I think hopefully I don't know whether we've he says that how unique is the COVID vaccine from other, okay, yeah, we've answered that. Someone is asking that how long does the coronavirus vaccine last? I think we've answered that. Okay, yeah.
I think I see one here. Um, are there any long-term side effects of COVID-19 vaccine?
I think
For now, no. Vaccines, unlike drugs, don't typically have long-term side effects. If you're going to have a problem with a vaccine, you typically would see it within the first 30, at most 60 days. And over 400 million doses of these COVID-19 vaccines have so far been administered around the world, and there's hardly any reports of severe adverse reactions. A few people have had bad allergic reactions, but that was more based on their own underlying allergies. So I think it's like a small number out of every million have reported severe allergic reactions. But in general, most people have just had the symptoms I described, which are, sort of mild feverishness and pain or headaches, a little bit of dizziness and nausea. But these are not long-term side effects. After 2 days, you're back to normal. So as far as we know, there are no long-term side effects. There are long-term side effects of COVID, though. So once again, we should distinguish between COVID-19, the disease, and the COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccine has no known long-term side effects. The disease, which you're trying to take the vaccine to prevent, has well-documented long-term side effects, which you don't want to get. So all the more reason to get the vaccine.
mm. Someone is asking that is herd immunity only determined through vaccination? Can the previously infected individuals contribute to herd immunity by dint of their so-called natural immunity?
So that's a good point. Unfortunately, it will appear as though um, herd immunity does not result from natural infection. So it
So I think you just have to forget about it. But you are saying
natural
Sorry,
natural infection appears to not, because people can get infected multiple times. It appears as though natural infection does not really give you complete protection. So it suggests that people who are exposed naturally may not contribute as much to herd immunity as, say, for other diseases where if you are exposed, you get the disease once, you don't get it again. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, you can get it 3, 4, 5 times. So natural exposure doesn't really induce protection the way the vaccine is able to do.
Someone asked me that does hydroxychloroquine help to combat COVID-19?
No. Hydroxychloroquine was extensively studied. There was a whole trial done by the WHO in a number of countries, and in the end, no benefit.
How
There's
long?
currently no treatment. There's no real treatment for COVID. Dexamethasone, which is sort of a steroid, can help with the severe symptoms, but chloroquine does not work.
Okay. Someone is asking that you mentioned mutation in relation to DNA, but we are dealing with RNA virus. So how do you translate that explanation here?
So it's an RNA virus. It doesn't mean that it cannot mutate. So we think of mutations. Mutations are changes that happen in genetic material, whether it's RNA or DNA. Now, for us, our genetic material is DNA. We make RNA to make protein. Viruses can be DNA viruses, they can be RNA viruses. In this case, coronavirus is an RNA virus. So its genome is RNA. So it acquires mutations in the RNA.
Hmm. Richard Singh is asking that how long should you avoid taking in alcohol before and after taking the vaccine?
I don't think there's any real link or problem with alcohol and the vaccine. Obviously, it's probably a good idea not to show up drunk, but alcohol, I don't believe alcohol has any real interaction at all with the vaccine. Um, yeah.
Okay. Charles is asking that law and order and vaccination. To what extent should liberal countries tolerate anti-vaccine campaigners, given the enormous indiscriminate negative impact of the vaccine,
of the virus.
of
Of
the
the
virus, of
virus.
the virus? Sorry, Charles. Thank you.
So the well, it's a good. I mean, that is a question for governments and for law and order. I think yes, typically we try to encourage people. Locking people up usually is counterproductive. It makes people into martyrs and makes people think that you are trying to force people to do something they want to do. Currently in Ghana, the approach is they encourage people. You're not forced to take the vaccine. It's just strongly recommended. Um, I think misinformation should be dealt with. So if people are blatantly spreading misinformation, even after they have been told not to, then that perhaps is something that you could potentially prosecute people for, because misinformation is very harmful. But then, of course, you have, freedom of speech. So you have to balance that. But I don't think right now we're at the stage where, you know, I think, yes, anti-vaccine campaigners should not be given a platform. But at the same time, you recognize people's liberties. So I think more importantly is to just make our own information campaigns much more visible so that people can hear both sides. And I think usually when people hear both sides and they look at who is saying one thing on that one side and they look up the people on the other side, I think people are usually smart enough to make the right decision. But we have to recognize that misinformation often spreads much, gossip and lies tend to spread much better than the
Fact.
truth. So, but in fact, right? So we have to be too smart to that and try and help people to realize, um, but also communicate the risks. I think because we didn't want people to panic, we may have softened the blow too much about COVID-19. COVID-19 is a terrible disease. COVID-19 is the biggest threat the world has seen since 1918. Not malaria, not HIV, not Ebola, COVID-19.
Mm.
And yet, if I ask people what they are more scared of, they'll probably all say Ebola.
Ebola, yeah.
And yet, the long-term economic effects of COVID-19 already have dwarfed anything Ebola has ever done. The number of deaths, more people have died of COVID-19 than have ever died of Ebola. Right? Ebola, you hear it now outbreak in Guinea, somewhere in Congo, kills maybe 20, 30, 40 people. COVID-19 has killed over 2 million people,
Yeah,
infected over 100, almost 200 million people.
yeah.
This is the biggest pandemic. This is the worst disease that the world has seen in over 100 years. And yet we behave as if,
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
I'll wait. I don't want to get a vaccine now. I'll wait for people to get it so that they'll take it. That clearly shows that we have not got our risk communication right. And it's unfortunately, it seems to be more our problem. If you look at America, Europe, they are taking it extremely seriously. They are not playing, but
Yeah,
we seem to be playing. I hope we don't pay a price for it.
yeah, we'd hope so. Someone is asking that, okay, I think we've answered this question. I don't know whether this person joining me, that is there any relationship between COVID-19 and erectile dysfunction? I think you said no.
I
Or do you want to take
not
that?
not
Not directly, there's no
no,
evidence.
there are people who have had the disease who have reported erectile dysfunction. So the disease has been linked to some at least transient erectile dysfunction. I don't think it's long lasting, but it stays for maybe a week or two. The vaccine, no. So once again, we have to distinguish. People often conflate. They say COVID-19 and they are thinking vaccine, they are thinking disease. They are two very different things.
Okay. Someone is asking that why do we have a vaccine for COVID-19? We just arrived not so long ago, but no vaccine so far for HIV.
That is simple because HIV affects mostly Africans.
It's
No, it's the truth.
the
It's
truth.
simple as that.
Blatant truth.
HIV, probably, I don't know what well over probably 80% of the burden of HIV is in Africa. So it's viewed very much, even though there are people in America and Europe who have HIV, the level HIV prevalence in the US is very, very low compared to HIV prevalence in some parts of Africa. You have some countries in Africa where HIV prevalence is almost 20%, right? Ghana, thankfully, I think it's less than 5%, probably even maybe around 2 or 3%. There are countries, so HIV is an African problem. And because of that, no one is putting the type of money into developing, even though they are trying, and they've been trying for a long time. HIV is a very difficult virus to tackle. HIV is a more difficult virus to tackle in many ways than COVID-19 in terms of its biology. But it also has not seen the level of investment. We've probably invested more in COVID-19 over the span of 12 months than has ever been invested in HIV research or malaria research, probably even combined. So it's money.
Yeah. Charles Rempa, I think you have your hand up. Do you want to ask?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Bediako. He has correctly answered my question in relation to law, order, and vaccination. But my only addition will be that, given the extent to which this virus is causing devastation in terms of, mortality, in terms of crumbling economies, in terms of the fact that for the past century, after we had the flu and all that, we've not had something closer to what we are currently experiencing. And I think the thing about liberalism, and I deliberately use the word liberal countries, is that there's still that reservation of power given to sovereignty, so that the sovereign, I'm a social scientist, so the sovereign is the one who is able to decide on the exception. In other words, when we all agree to our freedom of expression and we get to a point where allowing freedom of expression becomes counterproductive, not just to a minority, but virtually everyone else, at that point, I believe sovereignty should reign. Because for me, there's no way. I've listened to anti-campaigners, and I think they are being just unnecessarily, difficult. And no matter how you try to convince them, they don't give in. Sometimes, you would have to apply the law because the law makes room for that anyway. And if you are to go into history, those who are the fathers of liberalism, whether it is John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, Foucault, and all these guys, they still understood the fact that there's the need for sovereignty when there's crisis. And it is part of social contract, which shapes contemporary constitutional governance. So I think maybe Ghana needs to take that conversation up, and let's find a way of dealing with this, because it's more serious than maybe we think it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles.
I'll just say, I think you make good points. I think right now our challenge is even more fundamental in that we don't have enough vaccines in the country yet. If we have 5 million vaccines, 10 million vaccines, and people are refusing to take them, then I think that is when you now have to I take your point entirely that some people are just refusing to be convinced. But right now we're not, there is some level of hesitancy, but we don't have the volume of vaccines in the country yet that hesitancy is having an effect. Because if most people who are, the vaccines that have been available have been given. So till we get to a point where we are risking wasting vaccine, I think for now we just keep going. We ignore those who maybe, some people will say they won't get it, but the moment it gets to their turn, they'll line up and get it. In fact, some people are probably bashing it and they've already gotten the vaccine.
Yeah.
So I think for now, the more fundamental concern I have is we have still not received our next batch of COVAX. There is a lot of fighting going on for the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe. We've seen fights between Australia, Italy, countries with much more money than we have are fighting for this same vaccine that we have here. Now, obviously, ours is being made by the Serum Institute of India. There's no reason why those countries cannot go and start buying from Serum Institute of India. It's the same vaccine, it's identical. And so the question we should be asking ourselves is, what is the global demand? After the UK announced that AstraZeneca vaccine reduced significantly hospitalizations among people over 70, all of a sudden across Europe, all the countries who were hesitant to use AstraZeneca vaccine started ordering it, and that's what caused the issues. To the point now, EU and the UK are in a fight over exports and everything. It's getting very messy. They are fighting over this vaccine. So if they are fighting over it and they have all the money, we don't have money.
Mm-hmm.
Where is our vaccine going to come from?
Yeah, thank you.
So I think that is the fundamental question that we have, and that's what actually should be scaring us.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of questions that are popping up in the chat box, but I think if I'm going to take all of them, we probably will not leave here anytime soon, but I promise that we are going to have another session. So look out for another session where it looks like there are still a lot of questions. People still need to be convinced after all this, and questions are still popping up. So I'm sorry if I haven't had to take your question. We are dealing with time here, and time constraint is a weekend, and we promise that we will bring this session for 1 hour. I think that it's right for me to say on behalf of Vacation Initiatives in Science Africa, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Yaw Bediako, for taking time off your weekend, an hour of your weekend, to help best all the myths and misconceptions that are available around COVID-19. We hope that another time when we call on you, you also come around to, trash all this myth. It's interesting the questions that are coming. So we hope, and you've done justice to them, by the way. So thank you so much. And just to end, I just want to thank all of you here who have also made time to come to have your questions answered. I'm sorry if your question wasn't answered. Um, Please look out for another session on this on our pages on social media, which is Vacation Initiatives in Science Africa, on both Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. So you can even send in your private question. We've also gotten immunologists on the pages and also share them with Dr. Yaw Bediako. But look out for these sessions. We have our executives also on the line. I can see Solomon Nene on the line. Charles Prempe is one of our co-founders, together with Solomon, who happens to be the chief in Adan. Myself, Sebastian Eugene Arthur, who is also one of the co-founders of Vacation Initiative in Science Africa. Millicent Opoku is also on the line. Dr. Solomon is also on the line. Sylvester is on the line. And I see a couple of visa volunteers who have had to work on several projects with us also on the line. And I would just want to give you guys a big shout out for making time to come. So until then, do follow us on our Facebook pages and all our social media handles, because we most of our executives also go on tours to actually speak on this COVID-19 vaccine, so you can have your questions chased thereafter. Thank you so much for coming. Until same time next week, watch out for the next session of our information session on COVID-19 vaccine, and probably next time bring your family along, call a friend, or call your parents to also come to listen. It will be good to also inform them as well. Thank you so much for coming, and bye-bye.